Captain Marcus Stone adjusted his ceremonial sword as he made his evening rounds through Ravencrest Palace. The ancient corridors echoed with his measured footsteps, each sound amplifying in the vast emptiness that settled over the royal residence after sunset. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with an electricity that made the hair on his neck stand on end. As head of the Royal Guard's Night Watch, Marcus had walked these halls for nearly 8 years. He knew every creaking floorboard, every shadow cast by the ornate chandeliers, every portrait of long-dead monarchs whose eyes seemed to follow him in the flickering candlelight. The palace held secrets in its stones, whispers of centuries past that only revealed themselves to those who truly listened. The third floor housed the royal family's private quarters, a section of the palace that few were permitted to enter. Marcus's security clearance granted him access, but he rarely ventured there unless summoned. Tonight, however, intelligence reports had indicated unusual activity in the area. Strange sounds, unexplained lights, and servants speaking in hushed tones about things that didn't quite add up. Prince Alexander's nursery occupied the corner suite, overlooking the palace gardens where morning light would stream through tall windows, casting rainbow patterns across the expensive Persian rugs. The young prince, barely 6 years old, had been the kingdom's greatest joy since his birth. His late mother, Queen Isabella, had died tragically in a riding accident 2 years prior, leaving the entire nation in mourning. King Edmund had remarried within 18 months, a decision that sparked considerable controversy among the nobility and common folk alike. Queen consort Elena Ravencrest, formerly Elena Blackwood, came from a wealthy but politically ambitious family. Her beauty was undeniable, her intelligence sharp, but something about her had always unsettled Marcus. Perhaps it was the way she looked at people, as if calculating their worth, or how she seemed to appear and disappear from rooms without anyone noticing. As Marcus approached the nursery wing, he noticed the door to Prince Alexander's playroom stood slightly ajar. Golden light spilled into the hallway, creating long shadows that danced across the marble floor. This was unusual. Lady Victoria Sterling, the prince's devoted nanny, always ensured the children's rooms were properly secured before retiring for the evening. She had served the royal family for over 15 years and was meticulous about safety protocols. Marcus paused, listening carefully. He could hear movement inside the room, but it didn't sound like a child playing. The sounds were more deliberate, methodical, as if someone was searching through belongings or rearranging furniture. His training kicked in immediately. Any unauthorized presence in the royal quarters represented a potential security threat, regardless of who it might be. Drawing closer to the door, Marcus pressed himself against the wall and peered through the crack. What he saw made his blood run cold. Queen consort Elena knelt beside Prince Alexander's toy chest, her elegant hands moving through the contents with practiced efficiency. But she wasn't simply organizing toys. She was removing small objects from various hiding places, examining them under a magnifying glass, and making notes in a leather-bound journal. The queen consort wore a dark cloak over her nightgown, and her usually perfectly styled hair hung loose around her shoulders. In the soft lamplight, her face looked different, harder somehow, with an expression Marcus had never seen before. It was the face of someone engaged in serious, secretive work. Most disturbing was what surrounded her. Scattered across the Persian rug were dozens of small items that Marcus recognized as Prince Alexander's most treasured possessions. His wooden soldiers, carved by the royal carpenter. His collection of colorful marbles, a gift from his late mother. His leather-bound picture books, each one carefully selected by Queen Isabella before her death. But Elena wasn't treating these items with the reverence one would expect. Instead, she handled them like evidence in an investigation. Marcus's mind raced. What could the queen consort possibly be searching for in a 6-year-old's playroom? Why was she conducting this search in secret, under cover of darkness? And, most importantly, did this represent a threat to Prince Alexander's safety? His duty was clear. As head of the royal guard, Marcus was sworn to protect the royal family from all threats, internal and external. But confronting the queen consort required delicate handling. She wasn't just any intruder, she was the king's wife and held considerable political power. Any accusation he might make would need to be supported by irrefutable evidence. Marcus decided to observe longer, hoping to understand Elena's true purpose. He adjusted his position slightly, ensuring he could see the entire room while remaining hidden in the shadows. The queen consort continued her methodical search, occasionally pausing to write in her journal or to examine something more closely with her magnifying glass. Then, Elena did something that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. She removed a small vial from her cloak pocket and used a tiny brush to apply some kind of substance to several of Prince Alexander's toys. The liquid seemed to absorb into the materials, leaving no visible trace. Marcus had seen enough poison detection training to recognize what he was witnessing. Someone was either testing for toxins or applying them. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If Elena was poisoning the young prince's belongings, it would be a slow, untraceable method of assassination. Prince Alexander spent hours each day playing with these toys, touching them, sometimes even putting smaller pieces in his mouth as children do. A carefully applied poison could accomplish what a more direct attack never could, appearing to be nothing more than a tragic childhood illness. But, why would Elena want to harm Prince Alexander? The answer came to Marcus with chilling clarity. With the young prince gone, Elena's own children, should she have any in the future, would be next in line for the throne. She had married into the royal family, but her position would never be truly secure as long as Isabella's son lived to inherit his birthright. Marcus knew he had to act, but he also knew he needed proof. His word alone wouldn't be enough to convince King Edmund that his beloved new wife was attempting to murder his son. He needed evidence, documentation, something that would stand up to the inevitable investigation that would follow any accusation he might make. Quietly, Marcus reached for the small camera he carried for security documentation. The device was designed for low-light conditions, perfect for surveillance work. He began taking photographs of Elena's activities, capturing images of her applying the mysterious substance to the prince's toys, her journal filled with notes, and the various items she had collected. As he worked, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He held the prince's life in his hands, and, possibly the future of the entire kingdom. If Elena succeeded in her apparent plan, the Ravencrest dynasty would effectively end with Prince Alexander's death. The throne would eventually pass to Elena's bloodline, fundamentally altering the course of Valdorian history. The queen consort seemed to be finishing her work. She carefully returned most of the toys to their proper places, though Marcus noticed she kept several items in her cloak. Her movements became more hurried, suggesting she was aware of the time and the risk of discovery. Marcus made a crucial decision. He would confront Elena now, while she was caught in the act, rather than waiting to build a more complete case. The immediate danger to Prince Alexander outweighed the political considerations. If his accusations proved wrong, he would face disgrace and exile. If they proved right, he might save the life of Valdoria's future king. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped away from the wall and pushed the nursery door fully open. The hinges creaked slightly, causing Elena to freeze in place like a deer caught in torchlight. For a moment, neither of them moved, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled and respectful despite the circumstances. "Might I inquire what brings you to Prince Alexander's playroom at this late hour?" Elena's face transformed in an instant, shifting from the hard, calculating expression Marcus had observed to the practiced smile of royal propriety. She rose gracefully from her kneeling position, smoothing her cloak with hands that barely trembled despite being caught in such compromising circumstances. "Captain Stone," she replied, her voice carrying the perfect mixture of surprise and mild annoyance that one might expect from a queen consort interrupted during a private moment. "How you startled me. I couldn't sleep and thought I heard noises coming from Alexander's room. As his stepmother, I felt it my duty to investigate." Marcus studied her face carefully, noting the way her eyes darted momentarily toward the items she had been examining before returning to meet his gaze. Her explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but several details didn't align with what he had witnessed. The methodical nature of her search, the careful documentation in her journal, and, most damning, the vial of mysterious liquid she had applied to the prince's toys. "I see," Marcus replied, taking a step into the room while maintaining respectful distance. "And, did you discover the source of these noises, Your Majesty? Perhaps a loose shutter or settling foundation stones?" Elena's smile remained perfect, but Marcus caught a flash of something darker in her eyes. Nothing more than the usual sounds of an old palace, Captain. You know how these ancient buildings can be, especially on windy nights like this one. As she spoke, Marcus became acutely aware of the complete silence surrounding them. No wind rattled the windows, no sounds echoed from other parts of the palace. If anything, the night was unusually still, making Elena's explanation even less credible. Indeed, Marcus nodded, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his sword hilt. It was a subtle gesture, one that could be interpreted as mere habit, but it also served as a reminder of his authority and readiness to act if necessary. Though I must confess, I've been patrolling these halls for the better part of an hour and heard no unusual sounds myself. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of Marcus's words settled between them. Elena's composure remained intact, but he could see the rapid calculation happening behind her eyes. She was assessing the situation, determining how much he might have seen or heard, and planning her next move accordingly. Perhaps, Elena said slowly, moving toward the door with deliberate casualness, the sounds were more subtle than I initially thought. Alexander sometimes talks in his sleep, and I may have mistaken his murmurs for something more concerning. Marcus shifted slightly, not blocking her path but making it clear he wasn't ready to end their conversation. That's quite possible, Your Majesty. Children do have vivid dreams. Though I should mention that Prince Alexander isn't currently in his bedroom. Lady Victoria took him to the guest wing earlier this evening. Something about the main heating system requiring repairs in this section of the palace. Elena's step faltered almost imperceptibly, but Marcus caught it. Her explanation about hearing the prince talk in his sleep had just been revealed as impossible, and they both knew it. The silence that followed stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap at any moment. Of course, Elena recovered smoothly, though her smile now seemed more forced. I had forgotten about the maintenance work. Lady Victoria mentioned it at dinner, didn't she? How silly of me to have confused the rooms. Marcus nodded politely, but his mind was working rapidly. Elena's claim about hearing sounds from Alexander's room had been her justification for being there, but if she knew the prince wasn't even in his quarters, why would she have investigated in the first place? The inconsistencies in her story were mounting, and he could see she was aware of the trap closing around her explanations. These old heating systems can be quite troublesome, Marcus agreed, his tone remaining conversational despite the undercurrent of tension. I believe the work is expected to continue for several more days. Prince Alexander may be staying in the guest wing throughout the repairs. Elena's eyes flashed with what Marcus could only interpret as alarm. If her plan involved gradually poisoning the prince through his toys, an extended absence from his usual room would significantly complicate her timeline. Marcus filed this observation away as further evidence of her true intentions. Several days? Elena asked, and, for the first time, her carefully controlled demeanor showed genuine concern. I hadn't realized the repairs would take so long. Perhaps I should speak with the maintenance supervisor about expediting the work. Alexander does so love his own room. I'm sure Prince Alexander appreciates your concern for his comfort, Marcus replied, deliberately emphasizing her role as stepmother rather than biological parent. Though I understand Lady Victoria has made the guest quarters quite comfortable for him. She even moved many of his favorite toys to ensure he feels at home. This information hit Elena like a physical blow, though she tried to hide her reaction. If Alexander's toys had been moved to his temporary quarters, her careful work in the playroom would be meaningless. She would need to find a way to access the guest wing, a much more challenging proposition given the increased security in that area due to recent renovations. Marcus watched these realizations play across Elena's features and knew he was witnessing confirmation of his worst suspicions. An innocent person would have been relieved to hear that the prince was comfortable in his temporary quarters. Elena's obvious distress at this news revealed the true nature of her concerns. Well, Elena said, her voice slightly strained despite her efforts to maintain composure, I should return to my chambers. The king will be wondering where I've gone. Of course, Your Majesty, Marcus replied, stepping aside to allow her passage but not before adding, though I believe His Majesty retired quite early this evening. Chancellor Whitmore mentioned he had taken a sleeping draught for his recurring headaches. Elena paused in the doorway, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorframe. Marcus's casual mention of the king's medicated sleep state carried an implicit message: no one would be looking for her for hours, giving her plenty of time for whatever activities she had planned. The fact that Marcus knew her husband's condition suggested he was far more aware of the palace's nighttime activities than she had assumed. "Captain Stone," Elena said, turning back to face him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I hope you won't mention this little encounter to anyone. I wouldn't want the staff to think I don't trust Lady Victoria's capabilities with Alexander's care." The request was phrased politely, but Marcus recognized it for what it was: a warning. Elena was making it clear that she expected his silence about finding her in the prince's room. Her concern about appearances was secondary to her need to keep her activities secret. "Your Majesty's privacy is always my concern," Marcus replied diplomatically, though he made no explicit promise of silence. "Though I should mention that palace security protocols require me to document any unusual occurrences during my rounds." Elena's face went pale beneath her carefully applied cosmetics. Security documentation would create an official record of her presence in the prince's room, something that could be referenced later if questions arose about the boy's health or safety. "Surely," Elena said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "a stepmother checking on her child's quarters hardly qualifies as an unusual occurrence?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Under normal circumstances, certainly not. Though the hour is quite late, and Prince Alexander's absence from his room does make the situation somewhat noteworthy." The word noteworthy hung in the air between them, carrying weight far beyond its simple definition. Marcus was making it clear that he found Elena's behavior suspicious and would be treating it accordingly in his official reports. Elena drew herself up to her full height, every inch the royal consort prepared to assert her authority. "Captain Stone, I trust you understand the delicate nature of palace relationships. Sometimes actions that appear questionable from the outside have perfectly innocent explanations. I would hate for misunderstandings to damage the harmony of our household." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Elena was reminding Marcus of her position and influence, suggesting that challenging her could have serious consequences for his career and standing within the palace hierarchy. Marcus bowed slightly, acknowledging her rank while maintaining his dignity. "I understand completely, Your Majesty. Palace harmony is indeed precious, and protecting it requires careful attention to all details, however small they might seem." As Elena finally left the playroom, Marcus remained behind, his mind racing with the implications of their encounter. He had successfully documented evidence of her suspicious behavior, but he also knew that confronting her directly had escalated the situation significantly. Elena now knew that someone was watching her, someone who wasn't convinced by her explanations. The game between them had begun in earnest, and Marcus realized that Prince Alexander's life might depend on who proved more clever in the moves that would inevitably follow. Part 3 the following morning brought an unusual tension to Ravencrest Palace that seemed to seep through the ancient stones like morning mist through the gardens. Marcus had spent the remaining hours of darkness reviewing the photographs he had taken and documenting every detail of his encounter with Queen Consort Elena. The evidence was compelling but circumstantial, requiring careful handling if he hoped to protect Prince Alexander without causing a political crisis that could destabilize the kingdom. As dawn broke over the palace grounds, Marcus made his way to the quarters of Lady Victoria Sterling, the prince's longtime nanny. If anyone could provide insight into Elena's relationship with Alexander, or notice changes in the child's health and behavior, it would be Victoria. Her devotion to the royal family was absolute, and her observational skills, honed through years of childcare, were remarkably acute. Lady Victoria's sitting room occupied a corner of the servants' wing that had been elegantly appointed to reflect her elevated status within the household. As the prince's caregiver and former nanny to his late mother, Victoria held a position of unique trust and authority. She had been with the family since before Queen Isabella's marriage to King Edmund, making her one of the few people who truly understood the dynamics that had shaped the royal household. Marcus found Victoria already dressed and preparing for the day, her silver hair pinned in the precise style she had maintained for decades. At 62, she moved with the efficiency of someone whose life had been dedicated to caring for others, but Marcus noticed new lines of worry around her eyes that hadn't been there before Elena's arrival at court. "Captain Stone," Victoria greeted him with surprise, setting down her morning tea. "How unusual to see you at this hour. Has something happened?" Marcus closed the door behind him and took a seat across from the woman who had, in many ways, raised the future king of Valdoria. "Lady Victoria, I need to speak with you about a matter of the utmost delicacy. What I'm about to share must remain between us until we determine the proper course of action." Victoria's expression grew serious immediately. Her years of service had taught her to recognize when situations required discretion and careful judgment. "You have my complete attention, Captain." Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that what he was about to reveal would shock and disturb the woman who had dedicated her life to protecting Alexander. "Last night, during my security rounds, I discovered Queen Consort Elena in Prince Alexander's playroom. She was conducting what appeared to be a systematic search of his belongings and appeared to be applying some kind of substance to several of his toys." The color drained from Victoria's face as the implications of Marcus's words settled over her. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup, the delicate porcelain rattling against the saucer. "Are you certain of what you saw?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could there be some innocent explanation?" Marcus shook his head gravely. "I observed her for nearly 20 minutes before making my presence known. Her actions were methodical and secretive. She was taking notes in a journal and using tools that suggested scientific examination rather than casual reorganization. When I confronted her, her explanations were inconsistent and contradictory." Victoria was silent for several long moments, staring out the window at the gardens where she had spent countless hours playing with Alexander during his early childhood. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of painful recognition. "There have been things," she said slowly. "Small things that individually seemed insignificant, but together they paint a troubling picture. Alexander has been experiencing periods of unusual fatigue and mild stomach discomfort. Nothing severe enough to alarm the royal physicians, but concerning enough that I've been monitoring him more closely." Marcus leaned forward, his worst fears beginning to be confirmed. "When did these symptoms begin?" "Approximately 3 months ago," Victoria replied, her voice growing stronger as she recognized the importance of their conversation. "Just after Queen Elena began taking a more active interest in Alexander's daily routine. She started visiting the nursery more frequently, bringing him special treats and spending time in his playroom when he was at his lessons." The timeline aligned perfectly with Marcus's suspicions. Elena had been gradually implementing her plan, introducing whatever substance she was using in small doses to avoid immediate detection while building up to more dangerous levels over time. "Have you noticed any particular pattern to Alexander's symptoms?" Marcus asked. "Do they occur after specific activities or at certain times of day?" Victoria's eyes widened as she made connections she had previously missed. "Yes, actually. The symptoms are most pronounced after he's spent extended time in his playroom, particularly when he's been playing with his wooden soldiers or handling his mother's jewelry box. I thought perhaps he was developing sensitivities to certain materials, but now we must consider the possibility that those items have been deliberately contaminated," Marcus finished, feeling sick at the thought of a child being slowly poisoned by his most treasured possessions. Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the window as she struggled to process the full horror of what they were discussing. "That monster," she whispered, her usual composure cracking under the strain of realization. "She's been systematically poisoning a child. Isabella's child. The rightful heir to the throne." Marcus rose and moved to stand beside her, understanding that she needed time to absorb the magnitude of Elena's betrayal. "Lady Victoria, I need your help to protect Prince Alexander and gather the evidence necessary to expose Elena's crimes. But we must proceed carefully. Any false move could endanger the prince further or allow Elena to escape justice." Victoria turned to face him, and Marcus saw that the gentle nanny had been replaced by a fierce protector whose maternal instincts had been fully awakened. "Tell me what you need me to do, Captain. That woman will not harm Alexander while I draw breath." Marcus outlined his plan carefully. Victoria would continue Alexander's stay in the guest quarters, citing ongoing maintenance issues that would require several more days to resolve. This would keep the prince away from his contaminated belongings while they gathered evidence. Meanwhile, Victoria would begin documenting any symptoms or behavioral changes she observed, creating a medical record that could support their case. Most importantly, Victoria would discreetly arrange for samples of Alexander's toys and personal items to be tested by Dr. Matthias Blackstone, the kingdom's leading expert in toxicology. Dr. Blackstone had served the royal family for over 20 years and could be trusted with sensitive matters requiring absolute discretion. "There's something else," Victoria said as they finalized their plans. Yesterday, Queen Elena asked very specific questions about Alexander's schedule and routines. She wanted to know exactly when he played with certain toys and how long he typically spent in his room each day. At the time, I thought she was simply trying to bond with him, but now I realize she was calculating dosages. Marcus felt his anger building at the clinical coldness of Elena's approach. She had been treating Prince Alexander like a laboratory subject, carefully calibrating her poison to achieve maximum effect while avoiding detection. The level of planning and calculation involved made her crimes even more heinous. "We need to be prepared for the possibility that Elena will escalate her efforts once she realizes we're onto her," Marcus warned. "She may attempt to administer a larger dose to achieve quicker results, or she may try to eliminate anyone she perceives as a threat to her plan." Victoria nodded grimly. "I've already arranged for additional security in the guest wing, citing concerns about the construction work attracting unwanted attention. Alexander will not be left alone for even a moment." As they concluded their meeting, Marcus felt a mixture of hope and dread settling over him. They had identified the threat and begun implementing protective measures, but Elena remained in a position of power and influence that would make her extremely dangerous when cornered. The next phase of their investigation would require careful maneuvering to avoid triggering a desperate response that could prove fatal for Prince Alexander. Victoria walked Marcus to the door, her expression determined despite the gravity of their situation. "Captain, I want you to know that whatever comes next, I'm prepared to face it. Alexander is more than just my charge, he's the son I never had, and I'll protect him with my life if necessary." Marcus clasped her shoulder gently, recognizing in her the same fierce loyalty that had motivated his own career in service to the royal family. "Together, Lady Victoria. We'll face this together and ensure that Prince Alexander lives to claim his rightful place on the throne." As Marcus left Victoria's quarters and made his way through the palace corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. Elena's discovery that Alexander had been moved from his usual quarters would force her to adapt her plan, and desperate people in positions of power were capable of extreme measures. The game of cat and mouse that had begun in Alexander's playroom was entering a new phase, one that would test everyone's resolve and cunning. Marcus only hoped they could stay one step ahead of Elena's machinations long enough to save the prince and expose her crimes to the world. Part 4 Dr. Matthias Blackstone's private laboratory occupied the basement level of the palace's east wing, a space that few knew existed and fewer still had reason to visit. The room had been specially constructed during the reign of King Edmund's father, designed to handle sensitive medical matters requiring absolute secrecy. Soundproof walls, independent ventilation systems, and multiple layers of security made it the perfect location for the kind of investigation Marcus and Lady Victoria were now undertaking. 3 days had passed since their initial meeting, and the evidence they had gathered painted an increasingly disturbing picture of Queen Consort Elena's activities. Dr. Blackstone, a thin man in his 70s with piercing gray eyes and hands steadied by decades of precise work, had spent 48 hours analyzing the samples Victoria had discreetly collected from Prince Alexander's belongings. "Gentlemen, my lady," Dr. Blackstone began, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed his findings, "I must confess that in all my years of service to the crown, I have never encountered such a methodically executed poisoning attempt. The substance found on Prince Alexander's toys is a derivative of aconitine, commonly known as wolfsbane, but it has been chemically modified to delay its effects and mask its presence." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Aconitine was among the most deadly plant-based poisons known to man, and its detection in the prince's playroom confirmed their worst suspicions about Elena's intentions. The modification process requires considerable knowledge of chemistry and access to specialized equipment, Dr. Blackstone continued. This isn't the work of an amateur or someone acting on impulse. The poisoner has been carefully calibrating doses to produce gradual symptoms that would appear to be natural illness, ultimately leading to what would seem like tragic but unsuspicious death. Lady Victoria gripped the edge of the laboratory table, her knuckles white with tension. How long would this process take to prove fatal? Based on the concentration levels I've detected and Prince Alexander's body weight, I estimate that without intervention, the accumulated poison would reach lethal levels within 2 to 3 weeks, Dr. Blackstone replied gravely. However, the symptoms would become increasingly severe over the next several days, making it impossible to ignore the child's deteriorating condition. Marcus exchanged glances with Victoria, both understanding the implications. Elena's timeline had been accelerated by their interference, and she would likely need to find new methods of administration or risk exposure when Alexander's symptoms became too obvious to dismiss. There's more, Dr. Blackstone added, his expression growing even more serious. I've also detected trace amounts of digitalis in several samples, suggesting that the poisoner was experimenting with multiple substances. Digitalis affects heart function and could cause sudden cardiac arrest in a child Alexander's age. The combination of aconitine and digitalis suggests someone with extensive knowledge of both immediate and delayed action poisons. The revelation that Elena possessed such sophisticated understanding of toxicology raised new questions about her background and preparation for her crimes. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity, it was a carefully planned assassination that had been months, possibly years, in the making. Doctor, Marcus said, is there any way to trace the source of these modified compounds? Could they have been prepared in a private laboratory, or would the work require institutional resources? Dr. Blackstone considered the question carefully before responding. The chemical modifications I've identified would require access to advanced equipment and rare reagents. While not impossible to obtain privately, such materials would leave a paper trail through specialty suppliers. Additionally, the synthesis process would require considerable time and expertise. Victoria's face had grown increasingly pale as the scope of Elena's planning became clear. She must have been working on this since before she married the king. The level of preparation you're describing suggests months of advance work. Marcus nodded grimly, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. Which means Elena's interest in King Edmund may have been motivated by more than romantic attraction. She may have targeted him specifically to gain access to Prince Alexander and position herself as his successor. The implications were staggering. If their theory was correct, Elena had orchestrated an elaborate confidence scheme, wooing and marrying the king as part of a long-term plan to eliminate his heir and claim the throne for herself or her future children. The calculated coldness required for such a plan defied comprehension. We need to inform His Majesty immediately, Victoria declared, her voice shaking with anger and distress. King Edmund must know what kind of monster he has married. Marcus raised a cautioning hand. Lady Victoria, I share your urgency, but we must consider the political ramifications. If we present these accusations without absolute proof, Elena could claim we're orchestrating a conspiracy against her. Worse, if she suspects we're closing in, she might attempt to eliminate Prince Alexander immediately rather than risk exposure. Dr. Blackstone cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to his findings. There is one additional concern I must raise. My analysis suggests that Prince Alexander has already absorbed enough poison to cause permanent damage if not treated immediately. Even if we prevent further exposure, he will require specialized medical intervention to neutralize the toxins already in his system. The news hit Victoria like a physical blow. Despite their efforts to protect the prince, Elena's poison was still working its way through his small body, potentially causing irreversible harm. Time was running out faster than any of them had anticipated. What kind of treatment would be required? Marcus asked, his mind already working through the logistics of providing medical care without alerting Elena to their knowledge of her crimes. Activated charcoal to absorb remaining toxins, followed by supportive care to protect his organs while his body processes and eliminates the poison, Dr. Blackstone explained. The treatment itself isn't particularly complex, but it must be administered carefully and monitored closely. Any mistake could prove fatal. Marcus made a decision that would change the course of their investigation. Dr. Blackstone, can you begin treating Prince Alexander immediately, under the pretense of addressing his recent stomach ailments? Lady Victoria, you can explain to anyone who asks that you called an additional medical consultation due to your concerns about his symptoms. That could work, Victoria agreed, relief evident in her voice at the prospect of finally taking direct action to help the child. Alexander trusts Dr. Blackstone, and his presence wouldn't seem unusual given the symptoms I've been documenting. Dr. Blackstone nodded his agreement. I can begin treatment within the hour. The initial phases can be presented as standard remedies for digestive upset, buying us time to neutralize the more dangerous compounds in his system. As they finalized their medical intervention plans, Marcus outlined the next phase of their investigation. While Dr. Blackstone worked to save Prince Alexander's life, Marcus would begin gathering evidence of Elena's poison procurement and preparation. The paper trail Dr. Blackstone had mentioned could provide the concrete proof they needed to present their case to King Edmund and the authorities. There's something else we need to consider, Victoria said quietly. Elena has been asking increasingly specific questions about Alexander's condition and treatment. She seems almost anxious for his symptoms to worsen, suggesting she may be preparing to accelerate her timeline. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If Elena suspected that her poison wasn't working quickly enough, she might resort to more direct methods. A sudden, severe illness that required immediate medical attention could provide the perfect cover for a fatal dose of poison administered under the guise of treatment. We need to ensure that Elena has no access to Prince Alexander's medical care, Marcus declared. Any treatments, medications, or food that reaches the prince must be verified by our people first. Dr. Blackstone gathered his medical supplies, preparing to begin the delicate process of saving Prince Alexander's life while maintaining the appearance of routine care. I'll need to monitor his progress closely over the next several days. The poison's effects can be unpredictable, especially in a child's system. As the three conspirators prepared to implement their plan, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were entering the most dangerous phase of their mission. Elena had demonstrated ruthless intelligence and careful planning in her assassination attempt. When she realized that her scheme was unraveling, her response would likely be swift and decisive. The race to save Prince Alexander had begun in earnest, and Marcus knew that one false step could prove fatal not just for the young prince, but for everyone involved in exposing Elena's crimes. The next 24 hours would determine whether justice would prevail or whether the kingdom of Valdoria would fall under the rule of a woman capable of murdering a child to achieve her ambitions. Part 5. The confrontation Marcus had been dreading came sooner than expected. On the fourth day of Prince Alexander's treatment, as Dr. Blackstone reported encouraging progress in neutralizing the poison, Queen Consort Elena made an unexpected appearance in the guest wing. Her timing was no coincidence. Palace staff had reported seeing her in deep conversation with several servants, clearly gathering information about the prince's condition and care. Marcus was reviewing security reports in the corridor outside Prince Alexander's temporary quarters when Elena approached, her royal bearing intact but her eyes carrying a hardness he had seen once before in the prince's playroom. She was dressed impeccably as always, but something in her posture suggested barely contained tension. Captain Stone, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of her position while maintaining a veneer of politeness. I understand Prince Alexander has been receiving additional medical attention. As his stepmother, I believe I should be informed of any concerns about his health. Marcus had prepared for this moment, knowing that Elena's intelligence network within the palace would eventually alert her to their activities. Your Majesty, Lady Victoria felt it prudent to consult Dr. Blackstone about some digestive issues the prince has been experiencing. Nothing more serious than common childhood ailments, but she wanted to ensure proper care. Elena's smile was perfectly calibrated, but Marcus caught the flash of calculation behind her eyes. She was assessing how much he knew and how much of a threat he represented to her plans. Of course, Lady Victoria's devotion to Alexander is admirable, Elena replied smoothly. Though I must admit, I'm surprised she didn't consult me before bringing in additional medical staff. I do try to stay informed about all aspects of Alexander's well-being. The subtext of her words was clear. Elena was asserting her authority as the prince's stepmother and questioning why she had been excluded from decisions about his care. Marcus recognized this as a probing move, designed to gauge whether their actions were motivated by routine concern or deeper suspicion. "I believe Lady Victoria was acting out of an abundance of caution," Marcus replied diplomatically. Given the prince's recent symptoms and the ongoing construction disruptions to his normal routine, she felt immediate consultation was warranted. Elena nodded thoughtfully, but Marcus noticed her hands clenching slightly at her sides. "Yes, about that construction. It seems to be taking considerably longer than originally estimated. I've spoken with the maintenance supervisor, and he indicated the work could be completed much sooner if we prioritized Alexander's return to his usual quarters." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Elena was maneuvering to get Alexander back into his contaminated playroom, where she could resume her poisoning regimen. This confirmed that their protective measures had been effective, forcing her to seek new opportunities to access her victim. "I'm sure the maintenance staff is working as efficiently as possible," Marcus responded carefully. "Though I believe Lady Victoria has expressed satisfaction with the current arrangements. Prince Alexander seems to be adapting well to his temporary quarters." Elena's composure slipped slightly, revealing a flash of frustration that confirmed Marcus's suspicions about her true motivations. "Captain, I hope you understand that as queen consort, I have certain responsibilities regarding the royal family's welfare. I wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings about the chain of authority in matters concerning Alexander's care." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Elena was reminding Marcus that she outranked him in the palace hierarchy and could make life very difficult for anyone who opposed her will. More ominously, her reference to misunderstandings suggested she was prepared to frame their protective efforts as some kind of conspiracy or insubordination. Before Marcus could respond, Lady Victoria appeared in the corridor, her expression immediately becoming guarded when she noticed Elena's presence. The two women had maintained a cordial relationship since Elena's marriage to the king, but Victoria's recent discoveries had fundamentally altered her perception of her new queen. "Your Majesty," Victoria said with a respectful curtsy that nonetheless conveyed subtle coldness. "How unexpected to see you in this wing of the palace." Elena's smile brightened, but Marcus noticed it didn't extend to her eyes. "Lady Victoria, I was just expressing my concern about Alexander's health to Captain Stone. I understand he's been feeling unwell." Victoria's response was carefully measured, revealing nothing that might compromise their investigation while maintaining proper deference. "Nothing more than some stomach sensitivity, Your Majesty. Dr. Blackstone believes it may be related to the dust and disruption from the construction work. Fresh air and a change of environment seem to be helping considerably." Elena's face showed a moment of genuine alarm before she regained control of her expression. The implication that Alexander's symptoms were improving would be devastating news if she had been counting on his continued deterioration to cover her tracks. "I'm so relieved to hear he's feeling better," Elena said, though her tone suggested anything but relief. "Perhaps I could visit with him this afternoon? I've brought some of his favorite sweets from the kitchen." Marcus and Victoria exchanged the briefest of glances, both recognizing the offer of food as a potentially deadly trap. Elena was seeking direct access to the prince, likely with items that had been pre-poisoned to deliver a more concentrated dose. "How thoughtful of you," Victoria replied with practiced diplomacy. "Though Dr. Blackstone has recommended a very restricted diet while Alexander's digestion settles. Perhaps we could save the sweets for when he's feeling completely recovered?" Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her pleasant demeanor. "Of course, medical advice must be followed. Though surely a brief visit wouldn't be harmful? I do worry about him feeling isolated from his family during this difficult time." Marcus recognized this as Elena's attempt to establish emotional grounds for accessing the prince. By positioning herself as a caring stepmother concerned about Alexander's well-being, she was making it difficult to refuse her request without appearing unreasonable or suspicious. "Your Majesty's concern is touching," Marcus interjected carefully, "though I believe Prince Alexander is currently resting on Dr. Blackstone's orders. The treatment regime requires significant sleep to allow his body to recover properly." Elena's eyes flashed with anger that she quickly suppressed, but not before both Marcus and Victoria noticed her reaction. Her frustration at being denied access to her intended victim was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. "I see," Elena said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. "It seems there are quite a few new protocols surrounding Alexander's care. I trust these arrangements have been properly authorized by His Majesty?" The question was loaded with implications. Elena was suggesting that Marcus and Victoria might be exceeding their authority and threatening to involve King Edmund in their activities. This could potentially expose their investigation before they had gathered sufficient evidence to prove Elena's crimes. Marcus chose his words very carefully, knowing that his next response could determine the course of their entire mission. "Your Majesty, all security and medical protocols are implemented with the safety and well-being of the royal family as the primary consideration. I'm confident His Majesty would approve of any measures taken to protect Prince Alexander's health." Elena stared at Marcus for several long moments, clearly attempting to read the full meaning behind his diplomatic response. He met her gaze steadily, allowing her to see just enough determination in his eyes to convey that he would not be easily intimidated or maneuvered. Finally, Elena stepped back with a smile that had become purely predatory. "Well then, I suppose I should speak with the king about these new arrangements. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear about the various changes to his son's care regimen." As Elena turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, Marcus felt the weight of escalation settling over their situation. The queen consort was no longer content to work in shadows and secrecy. She was preparing to bring their conflict into the open, using her position and influence to force access to Prince Alexander. Victoria waited until Elena was well out of earshot before speaking. "She's going to involve King Edmund. If she convinces him that we're overstepping our bounds, he could order us to stand down." Marcus nodded grimly. "Which is why we need to present our evidence to His Majesty before Elena has the chance to manipulate the situation to her advantage." Dr. Blackstone's toxicology reports, combined with the photographic evidence and documentation we've gathered, should be sufficient to convince the king of Elena's crimes. As they watched Elena's figure disappear around the corner, both Marcus and Victoria understood that their covert investigation was about to become a very public confrontation. The next few hours would determine not only Prince Alexander's fate, but the future of the entire kingdom. They had successfully protected the prince from immediate danger and begun reversing the effects of Elena's poison, but the most challenging part of their mission still lay ahead. The time for shadows and secrecy had ended. Now they would have to trust in the strength of their evidence and the king's love for his son to see justice done and ensure that Elena's murderous ambitions would never threaten the crown again.